So we're going to pause rates, hurt the dollar, and then in turn, we got to have a lot more inflation coming down the road. So the Bank of Canada has paused the interest rate hikes. They are not going up. It was an absolute shocker today that this actually came out. Now, is it a shock? Because weeks ago, they actually mentioned that they would think about pausing rates. We always have to look at what is happening in the Bank of Canada and the Bank of the United States. That's the Federal Reserve. We have to look at that because normally, whatever the United States does, Canada does 6 weeks later. So we're now breaking apart from what the US is doing. Now, I said before, would they do it? I had doubted that they would. But even if they did, because they're always trying to save face, it does not mean that all the rates are going to be off the table. And I expect huge inflation to be coming in the next couple of years. So let's jump straight into the articles. I got a lot of stuff to show you, some crazy, awesome stuff too. I prepared a lot for you today. Please comment if you like this and give it a like. So if we look at what $1 million was on a property average price in Toronto, notice here 20%, 20%. We're going to leave it the exact same. We're also going to leave 25 years amortization, exact same. Last year's interest rate, this year's interest rate right now. Notice that $3,200 payment last year is now $5,300 payment. $5,300. Where do you come up with an extra $2,000 a month? And that's not it. We also have to pay food and gas and everything else that is up. Where are people coming up with this money? A lot of people cannot make the payments that are going on today. Take a look at this article right here. This is from CIBC. This tells us a little bit on how people are dealing with it. Over half of CIBC variable rate mortgage holders have reached their trigger rate. Now let's look at the spread of the different mortgages, okay? So if you look at quarter one of last year, right here in this square, 45% of people were sitting on a 20 or 25-year amortization, just like we did on the calculator. This is common. But if you see here, there was some people that were already itching up and closer to that 30% range. Look at what's happened in the past year. Now, all of a sudden, we have this huge amount of people that are putting 35 years or more mortgages on their home. This is a secret of where people are finding the money. They're stretching their mortgages farther and farther into the future. But why would they do that? Why would the banks even allow that? Because they already know that people cannot afford $2,000 more a month, every month, on top of all the other costs. So they're just stretching their payments out longer. That could be a big recipe for disaster. Okay, let's continue on, you guys. So I wanted to show you earlier, just today, I was looking on two TV screens at the same time. One screen was showing what is happening in the US. The US Fed Chair Jerome Powell has strong words about interest rate hikes, and it has the stock market trembling. This is in the US, but we have to know this. This is where we buy the majority of our stuff from. So stocks are falling on Tuesday. This was Tuesday, right? Because he said that they would have to raise interest rates because of high inflation. When they heard that, stocks dropped 460 points. Now he says that raised fears that inflation is staying stickier than feared, and the Fed will have to raise rates higher than earlier thought. Higher rates could drag down inflation because it slows the economy, but they hurt prices of stocks and houses, what we specialize in. They also raise the risk of a recession later on. First of all, I get kind of upset about some of these things, but we're already flat on into a recession. I've been saying that for a year now. How could anybody think that it's not? In the major cities in North America, home prices are down at least 25%. Doesn't matter what cities you go to, as long as it's over 1 million people, they're down that much. We are already in a recession, my friends, long in it. Now, the ultimate level of interest rates is likely to be higher than previously anticipated. Know that what he's saying in the US, that rates have got to go even higher. Yet at the same time, the Bank of Canada is holding its interest rates. So it wants to say, what about after that? The Bank of Canada announced on Wednesday that it would hold its key overnight rate at 4.5% after 8 consecutive rate increases. We all know that story. It is rough. Now, the Bank of Canada has highlighted the tight labor market on the rate decision, reference falling inflation at 5.9%, which is way above their 2% target. Please remember, if we just go back to last year, it was at 9, and today it is at 6. Just think of how much more they got to go to get it down to 2. Yes, there is a lag effect, but that's what Canada's depending on but it may not be enough for them. Now, it also says that they're watching closely for a softening of the jobs numbers relative to January's strong labor market. For inflation to continue to come down, we're going to need a softening in the labor market. Now we're getting into stuff that really hits home, and it hurts my soul because I care about people. I care about you guys. Just think about what this means when they say a softening of the labor market. Jerome Powell just testified before the US Senate and the House, and he says we need a softening of the labor market. Or they'll say, we need it to come into balance. But when the actual House and the senators were speaking, they said, based on your numbers, we need 2 million people to lose their jobs. And he's like, well, all we're interested in is a softening of the labor market. He goes, stop saying those words. Tell us exactly what you mean. You need 2 million people to lose their jobs. And in Canada, that would be around 200,000 people have to lose their jobs. Why don't we just live in a world, you guys, where we can say it like it is? Now, the Federal Reserve, number one, is coming under a lot of fire these days, right? They're saying all the money, the interest rates, whatever. These guys are only collecting the bill for what the government spent. Remember, it's the government that spent crazy money, 2020, 21, 22, right? They spent, what was it? In Canada, we spent $500 billion. In the United States, they spent $10 trillion. Crazy. Okay. So they spent it, and Jerome Powell's just the guy that's got to pay the bill. And this is how they're paying the bill. Let's not mince words here. Let's just say it like it is. Far too few people online are actually saying things the way they are. Okay. So here's the difference. United States, we got to raise rates a lot higher. Canada Bank is saying we're going to pause rates. Big mistake, Canada. Okay, now let's look at this. Canadian dollar to US dollar. We have to pay attention to this, you guys. Look at that dollar. The dollar is tanking. Okay, guys, this is just a 5-day chart. Let's go back a year. So our dollar was worth 80 cents before, and then it has been falling, blah, 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 blah. And now it is all the way down to 72 cents. Okay, so let's just look in the past 5 days. Do you notice that when Jerome Powell is going to be raising rates higher, and then they're going to mention the meeting that we had here, big legs down, big legs down. What does that mean? So we lost 8%. Do you see that right there? It went from 80 cents to 72 cents. All right, glad that you got that. Now, how much is that a problem? Canada has imports of 757 billion. Let's do some math. Let's take a calculator and write 757. We're going to have to bring it to the millions, okay? And multiply that by that 7% that we lost. So that's 52 million, but we have to add 3 zeros. We're going to have to add $52 billion more for that 7% that we lost. And who pays that extra 52 billion? Me and you. You and I got to pay that money, and that's going to be split between every toaster you buy, every loaf of bread that you buy, every single thing that you buy. And that 52 billion is going to be divided over everything. That's the way it goes. And so this is going to be hugely inflationary. Just think of it for a second. Our dollar has dropped way, way down, and the US dollar's value has gone up. So that means anybody who's out of the country looks at the Canadian dollar that's low and goes, oh, damn, everything's so cheap. I got to go buy all the Canadian stuff I can. All right. So exporters will do well, but what about anybody who's an importer and uses anything? So I want you to walk through your house and say, where did this food come from? Look on the back, made in Mexico, made in the Philippines, made in Europe, made in US. Okay. All of that, prices are going up. So this whole tactic, I understand that there's political needs to lower interest rates, to make home prices more affordable. I get it. I really, really do. But this is taking money out of one pocket to pay the other. So we're going to pause rates, hurt the dollar, and then in turn, we got to have a lot more inflation coming down the road, to which we can only respond with raising rates again. That is why I do not believe that we are done with inflation. Not even close. All right, so look at the Bank of Canada. It's maintaining its policy rate. Just go to the bankofcanada.ca. He's continuing its policy of quantitative tightening, which means it's unraveling its balance sheet, which is a good thing. Labor markets are remaining tight. This is what we talked about before. They want a lot of people to lose their jobs, millions of people. But you notice what they say here, the strength of China's recovery and the Russia-Ukraine war are upside risks. Absolutely. The risks that we have do not sit solely on our shoulders in Canada. We have to look at what's happening in the world because so much of our stuff, our supply chains, comes from other countries. Inflation is eased to 5.9% in January, still way, way high, but it says it's reflecting the lower price of increases for energy. Again, not within Canada's control. It is mostly controlled by OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries. So, guys, we have to call a spade, right? How do we survive in a world where everyone's telling us fibs? If we go on the Bank of Canada website, we can also see where their policy rate is staying the same. This is what I love. Please zoom in on this. We are Canada's central bank. We work to preserve the value of money. I find it hilarious. It's the first line. You can't make this up. It's like out of a movie. But if we look over time, doesn't matter if it's a US dollar or Canadian dollar, the value of the dollar is continually losing how much it can buy. So I just want you to think about this. Anybody that you know, my grandfather worked for $1 a day, period. I always tell that. My father started at $5 a day was his salary. When I started working, it was $40 a day. And today, you have to make a couple $100 a day. So what's happened? Are people 200 times richer than my grandfather was? No. It's not the case. It's that the dollar isn't worth as much. We're using a measuring stick that's like a melting ice cube in a hot desert sun. It's just melting away all the time. And that's what's happening with your dollar all the time, my friends. Now, if the reason is Canada and the United States and all countries just keep on printing and printing and printing and printing more money. Notice all the way back to the 60s, especially into the 70s when we got off the gold reserve, it just went banana. And at one point, you have to start asking yourself, this word gaslighting, okay? Using psychological methods into questioning their own sanity or powers of reasoning. You guys, this is what I always tell my wife. I tell myself, how do we survive in a world where everybody is telling you some kind of fib for their own benefit? I keep on like scratching my head and I wonder why. If the government would just say, okay, you guys, we know that you're paying 50% taxes, but we have to raise taxes another 20% and tax you 70%, people would revolt. But if they raise inflation 20%, all of a sudden it's so complicated to understand. I've read hundreds of books on money mechanics and stuff. It's so complicated that it just goes over people's head and they go, oh, something's like inflation. What is this? Fugazi. It's something. It's coming out of thin air. What is it? Right? And they don't know how it came. And we're talking about fighting it like it's some mythical beast when it's actually a beast of our own creations when the governments print too much money. Inflation is just too few goods being chased by too many dollars. It's always the same thing. Now, here is what I want to tell you. Inflation is just a relocation of money. The money doesn't disappear. The money just goes into another person's pocket. Now, imagine you had rich people and a middle class and then a poor class. All inflation does is it kind of just shoves a line down the middle and makes a whole bunch of people rich, a whole bunch of people poor, and it guts out that middle class. This has been happening for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years over all these different countries and all these different regimes. So regardless of government, I'm not talking about left, right, red, blue, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. What we're talking about is the systems that are in place and definitely money mechanics and macroeconomics and how it's set up to benefit a few and hurt a lot of different people. Now, the US, I'm looking at some of my notes here. They wanted 2 million people. Imagine the pain that that is going to cause long term. Imagine the pain that it's going to cause for us for inflation that's going to be coming. So I know that you are celebrating a pause in interest rates, which I totally get, because how can payments go from $3,000 a month to $5,000 a month? How can that happen? We have to understand that that is hurting people absolutely. So not raising the rates, I understand, will give a temporary reprieve, but a lot more inflation has to come if our dollar continues to tank. And we have a lot more things that are outside of this world, like they mentioned China in the Bank of Canada's report, the Russia-Ukraine conflict, massive, massive, massive inflation coming from that conflict. Also, if we look into the third thing, which is fuel prices, which is mainly controlled overseas in the Middle East, Canada has some massive, massive problems that are coming their way. And the majority of it is financial. Remember, too, I was always confused about this all the way through my 20s. Monetary policy and fiscal policy. What are those two things? Listen, the way I grew up, my father worked a job and my mom stayed home and looked after 6 kids. Of course she had to, right? She had 6 kids. My mom was spending the money. My dad was making the money. Yeah. So when my mom would go and spend the money and the credit card would come in the mail, guess what? All of a sudden, 45 days later, My dad has to now find the money to go pay off the bill. Yeah. So the government is like, mama, they're just spending the money out there, right? And the credit card bill comes due, and now it gets sent over to the Federal Reserve or the central bank going, pay for it. And they have to figure out how to pay for the thing, okay? The bill is due. So massive overspending in 2020, 2021. This is the bill. So if we got money given to us, do you remember for all the different programs that happened over the past couple of years, the bill is due now. And now we have got to pay it back. That's what inflation is. There is going to be some tough times coming in. So I know, guys, I've went off on a tangent. I've told you all this like rough stuff that is happening. The light at the end of the tunnel, is that every single time there's something that bad happens, there's an opportunity. What do they say? Like when God closes a door, he opens another one. And so you have a once in a decade opportunity. In this case, it hasn't happened since 2009 to 12. You're going to have an opportunity to buy all the things that you really wanted in your life at huge discounts, whether it's quads or snow machines or Sea-Doos, or if you wanted to buy your first house, or if you wanted to buy an investment property or open a business. You're going to have an amazing, amazing time. And that's why I always say next 2 years is going to dictate the next 2 decades of your life. Anyway, I wish you guys the very best. I want this information to show you how serious of a time that we are in, to prepare yourself in all the ways we always talk about in our videos, and to be able to take advantage of the amazing opportunities that are going to be coming your way in the next couple of years. Anyway, guys, I really love you. Thanks very much for coming on. If this helped you at all, please consider liking it, subscribing, and following, and I'll talk to you on the next video. Have a good night.